We just got some really interesting news yesterday around a BMNR competitor. They just dropped a very interesting press release that's going to affect BMNR. As well, BMNR dropped a press release of their own, not in response, but in conjunction with. I want to cover this sort of outside of the cadence of our weekly BMNR recap videos because I think it's very relevant and I think it's going to be very important. So I just want to share some raw thoughts around ETHZilla's recent offering. We've talked about ETHZilla in the past. I've mentioned how it could be a potential acquisition target for BMNR. And I also want to talk about BMNR's specific update on their weekly ETH purchases. As we know, they drop updates on a weekly basis. So I'm going to be covering both of these pieces of news and sharing my thoughts around these events in this video. Let's jump right in. Okay, so as you could probably tell, I just got off of the Bootleg Weekly podcast on Tuesday as I'm recording this, and we got some questions around BMNR. And I wanted to highlight the ETHZilla news because I think it's really interesting in the context of digital asset treasuries as a whole and of Ethereum companies as an ecosystem, as a product, essentially. Of course, we know BMNR is the biggest digital asset treasury in the Ethereum ecosystem, and ETHZilla is one of the much smaller players. And in the past, we've speculated that ETHZilla, I mean, it hasn't been doing very well from a stock perspective. It's actually very undervalued from a stock perspective, and that BMNR could buy these guys on the cheap and essentially take advantage of the fact that they're already holding Ethereum on their balance sheet with the overall strategy of proxy acquiring their underlying assets and by doing so, taking out a competitor while they're at it. ETHZilla, under the ticker symbol ETHZ, is only a $367 million market cap company, and we know that BMNR has over 300 million cash on hand, so it could be a very simple acquisition for them to do. Now, here's the interesting piece. ETHZilla just dropped a press release, and I'm sort of mixed around this news. ETHZilla sells approximately $40 million of Ethereum to facilitate stock repurchases. This was published yesterday at market close, October 27th. Now, the press release says that the company has repurchased approximately 600,000 shares for about $12 million since October 24th, just a few days ago. The company is buying back shares at a significant discount to the net asset value. As we know, the net asset value is basically what the company is trading at relative to the value of the underlying assets that they hold. And since this is a digital treasury company, this is a very important metric. So the press release highlights that they sold $40 million of Ethereum treasury holdings and plan to use the proceeds for share repurchases. It mentions that they have an existing board authorization for $250 million stock repurchase program. It also highlights that they plan to continue to sell Ethereum to repurchase their shares until the discount to the net asset value is normalized. And I think that's a really important part of the statement. Like, we're going to keep buying until we are at a one-to-one parity with the underlying value of the assets that we hold. We are leveraging the strength of our balance sheet, including reducing our ETH holdings to execute share repurchases. We expect these repurchases to be immediately accretive using cash raised through the sale of our ETH, while our common shares trade at a significant discount to NAV. By opportunistically repurchasing shares while our stock is trading below NAV, we plan to reduce the number of shares that are available for stock loan borrow activity while increasing the NAV per share of the company. ETHZilla continues to hold approximately $400 million of ETH on its balance sheet to support future strategic initiatives. Okay, so immediately they say we're going to buy until the discount is normalized. And they also say that we hold $400 million of Ethereum on the balance sheet. And if you look at the market cap, it's $367 million, which basically means that there's a very quick $30 million or so scalp, which would equate to about a 10% lift in the stock price for them to reach their NAV price. So theoretically speaking, the company would be buying another 10% worth of the shares to reach $400 million market cap, which is equivalent to their NAV. Now, if you look at ETHZilla, it's up 39% of the past 5 days. Of course, this news came out yesterday. And of course, we know that they've been acquiring shares. So that's why you see this run up here. When the news was announced, of course, ETHZilla popped double digits, about 20% at the peak. And it was also up again today. Now, why was it up again today? Well, you know that the company is acquiring shares in the background. So this is probably what's happening is it's artificially created by the company just buying back their shares. My guess is it's going to be up for a few more days for the rest of this week because they want to reach that 400 million NAV normalization, which they highlight here. They have 400 million ETH. and they're going to be keep buying until the market cap is equal to the ETH they have, so 400 million. So we know ETHZilla is going to go up, and that's basically a fact because the management team is going to make it go up by buying more shares. However, that's not the reason why I found this interesting. What is interesting to me is the fact that we have a digital asset treasury company that's now all of a sudden selling Ethereum. Because initially you would imagine that this is just a one-way street. The companies would raise more debt, and then they would use that debt to basically purchase more Ethereum. And if there is a discount to NAV, then of course that's going to get realized by the market. In this case, ETHZilla is saying, yeah, we don't want to do that. We want to sell Ethereum. Now, the main question I had was like, why can't they just go to the bank and say, give us $12 million in a debt and we'll pay you a couple of percentage points of interest? And we want to use that $12 million to increase their market cap. And when the market cap increases, then they can just dilute further to pay off their debt, if at all, if they want to. Why are they selling Ethereum? And I understand the game theory in the short term, it's going to help them to realize their NAV. But I think in the long term, it's not going to be great because they've already signaled to the market that they are open to the idea of selling the Ethereum on their balance sheet. And if I'm somebody looking for a new digital asset treasury company to park my cash into, I would not be looking at ETHZilla. If I was looking at them last week, I wouldn't be looking at them today because I essentially don't have any more guarantees that they're going to hold all their Ethereum regardless of what happens. If I go to MicroStrategy, for example, I know that they're going to hold their Bitcoin. I know that they're going to do everything possible to hold their Bitcoin and that they won't even consider selling their Bitcoin, even if they're trading at a discount. I think that if I go to BMNR, they're going to do the same. Tom Lee is going to hold all his Ethereum and do everything possible to not sell the Ethereum. They're going to raise debt from banks, investors, or they're just going to find some other financing tools to not sell Ethereum. And so I think the fact that ETHZilla sold Ethereum is going to be a bad brand reputation destroyer. And as a result of that, more people are going to stay away from the stock. And if more people stay away from the stock, then it's always going to trade at a discount to NAV. I think it's going to make it a good acquisition target because you can buy out this entire company for under the net asset value, meaning you buy a whole bunch of Ethereum on a discount. And speaking of buying Ethereum, we know one company that's been buying Ethereum consistently, and that is, of course, BMNR. BMNR just recently reported their updated holdings as of October 27th. This is just yesterday, $14.2 billion in total crypto and moonshots, which equates to 3.3 million Ethereum at $4,164 per ETH. They have 192 Bitcoin, $88 million stake in 8 co-holdings, and $305 million in unencumbered cash, which means that they can basically buy out ETHZilla tomorrow if they really wanted to and add all of that Ethereum onto their balance sheet. But again, ETHZilla doesn't have that much Ethereum when considered to BMNR. Here you have the digital asset treasuries ranked, and ETHZilla is all the way here at the bottom with $631 million of the total value, which is a mix of Ethereum, and the gray here is the cash, which you can see from them selling their Ethereum that they want to buy back their stock. BMNR, on the other hand, has over $13.8 billion in total value. So ETHZilla is a relatively small competitor in the grand scheme of things, but I still support the idea of bitmine purchasing ETHZilla because it's going to be an overall accretive thing. They can essentially proxy acquire cheap Ethereum through ETHZilla, and they can also take out a competitor in the meanwhile. BMNR remains one of the most liquid US stocks in the market, the 46th most liquid stock in the market here by 5-day trading volume. So it's something that is very popular amongst investors. It's just behind Goldman Sachs in the ranking. So the amount of trading volume that Goldman Sachs does, BMNR does almost the same amount. In fact, BMNR and MicroStrategy put together do 88% of digital asset treasury trading volume as a whole. Every single other digital asset treasury company does 12% of trading volume. Now, I'm going to talk about all of this as a whole when I talk about the weekly recap. And if you don't know what those are, I do weekly recaps of BMNR. I've done them for the past 3 or 4 weeks now. That's jam-packed with information. So definitely make sure you can check that out. I usually post them on Saturday or Sunday at the end of the week. And I'm going to talk about this. But what I want to say here is that basically ETHZilla making this move, number one, makes them more of an acquisition target in my mind because it signals to the market that this company is always willing to sell their Ethereum, which will always make them trade at a discount to NAV because the investor trust is not there. Why would investors buy ETHZilla when they can buy any other digital asset treasury company that won't sell their Ethereum, number one. Number two, I think it reinforces Bitmine's thesis because they're acquiring more and more Ethereum every single week. And as a result, the main metric to keep in mind is the Ethereum per share is increasing for BMNR holders. And finally, number three, I think BMNR could benefit from purchasing ETHZilla. They could do it very easily. They have over $300 million cash on hand to buy this company, and they're going to proxy acquire some Ethereum on the cheap. But more importantly, they also take out a competitor in doing so. This is just my raw thoughts on the ETHZilla raise. I think it's a great move in the short term, and there's more upside over the next week until they finally realize that NAV equalization. But I think it's going to be a bad move in the long term because of what it signals to the market and fundamentally what the thesis is for a digital asset treasury company. They're breaking that thesis by selling the underlying assets, right? So I don't think it was a long-term strategic move that they were making. And it just makes me question a little bit the management and what is the thesis of this company? Like, why would anybody buy ETHZilla versus BMNR in this case when they're going to sell their Ethereum? So anyways, I'm rambling now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.